Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Are we doing all right? Day 3, I guess, of RightsCon. Oh well, too much drinking? No. Too much meeting? Too many meetings, I guess. Good to see you, holding up with a bright face here with us in the room. It's my pleasure, my honor actually, to introduce these fabulous panelists from different countries sharing their experience. Just for our foreign guests to know, there are lots of important media outlets here in the room from Taiwan with us today. I do think they do have lots of questions for you. So we'll have maybe 15 minutes for Q&A session, but before that we will try to make the best of this 1 hour for them to share their wonderful and challenging experience with us. So maybe we can start with a little bit introduction from Hanna and from the way to this side. Can we welcome Hanna?
Thank you, Jason. It's an honor for me as well to be on a panel with such fantastic women and such a great moderator as well. As was introduced, my name is Hanna Song. I work at a Seoul-based NGO working on North Korean human rights issues. We're the database center for North Korean human rights, which is a bit of a mouthful, so we go by NKDB. We're a documentation organization, and we started our work in the late 1990s when the first wave of North Koreans started fleeing the country, and we started to learn about what was actually happening in this very closed, isolated world. It's always difficult to be working on an issue when you have very little access to the people. So I think it's really great to rethink about how we tell those stories when we aren't able to meet the people directly affected.
Thank you so much. We'll have further introduction of your working later. And then we have Denise.
My name is Denise Dresser. I am a Mexican political analyst, columnist, activist. I write for a Mexican newspaper named Reforma, which is the functional equivalent of the New York Times. I do a lot of radio and television and have been very active for many years on human rights advocacy, feminism, and the defense of democracy in the context of democratic backsliding in my own country.
I'm a Ukrainian journalist and the co-founder and CEO of the Public Interest Journalism Lab. Actually, our organization brought up this session. It was founded 5 years ago with the idea how to deal with this issue, how to speak about the journalism, human rights journalism, when people might not care or even are on the different political aisle. And what is fascinating for me that we started as a Ukrainian organization, but we brought our friends and colleagues understanding that actually issue is global. It's for everybody, but we have some hints how to deal with that.
Yeah, thank you, Nataliya. And we have Angelina.
Yes, thank you. It's a wonderful chance to talk together and absolutely brilliant company. So my name is Angelina Kariakina. I'm Nataliya's colleague. I'm co-founder of the Public Interest Journalism Lab. I'm a Ukrainian journalist and media manager. I used to run news at the Ukrainian public broadcaster for a couple of years until recently. Now I'm also the advisor to the head of board of the public broadcaster. We do research, we document war crimes, and we'll talk more about our work just in a second.
Thank you so much. Yeah, wonderful panel here today. I think today we'll cover issues not only for journalists, but as well as for human rights defenders around the world. How to have effective communication nowadays to your audience, to the stakeholders on cyberspace or via offline event like RightsCon, and how deal with the pushback from your audience, given how polarized it is right now, not only in domestic, but globally with different stakeholders. So both of them, they have different projects in the past and ongoing. They have successful lessons as well as challenging insights to share with us. So maybe we can start with Hanna as well, and then coming on this side. And each one can have 5 minutes to share your work and what is the best lesson you learned as a human rights reporting.
So I'm not a journalist, so it's really interesting to be on the other side of things. I often say that I really hate working with journalists, but I think it's also with the frustration that we often feel working on the issue. The North Korean human rights issue has been around for 20, 30 years now. We started our work, as I mentioned, in the late 1990s, firmly established in 2003, when the first wave of North Koreans started resettling in South Korea. We started realizing that these experiences were not just individual one-off stories, but the issue of systematic oppression that was happening within the DPRK that wasn't being told by anybody in North Korea and was actually being censored by the North Korean government. We started documenting human rights violations and now have amassed the largest repository and database on North Korean human rights records globally. This is more than what the UN has documented or what the South Korean government has documented. And mostly the lack of documentation that has happened until now is because of how polarizing and politicizing the issue has been. We are a non-political organization, but in South Korea, North Korean human rights is often seen to be a very conservative issue, which is interesting when it comes to how human rights is usually portrayed in other countries. In South Korea, if you talk about any other human rights issues, LGBTQ or environmental rights, it is usually covered by more left-leaning organizations, but as soon as you put North Korea in front of anything, immediately seen to be a right-wing issue, which is difficult in our work where human rights needs to be, solidarity, movement building across different sectors, but we're often siloed to work on it from a very country-specific issue. I think something that we've been thinking about a lot is how do you retell a story that has been going on for so long and where not much has changed, where people keep wanting something new and exciting and sensationalist to be able to report about. But our story is that the issue is that it's ongoing, that just because you have heard about it once doesn't mean it stopped happening. And that's, I think, why I struggle with journalists. They always want something juicy. They always want something to put on the front page, a headline, and they'll be like, we've already reported about this. But that's what we as human rights defenders and our organization wants to say is exactly, we have 150,000 stories of this, but you haven't covered it enough. So we'd love to be able to share and talk about that with my fellow panelists today.
Thank you so much, Hanna. So talking about eye-catching and getting all this story out, I think it's our pleasure to have Denise today with us. She was so humble. She didn't mention how influential she is right now being in Mexico with the audience. So maybe you can share with us what is your approach talking to your audience and how do you gain those followers with your social account and what is the price of that?
I'm going to talk about what it means to be a journalist or an opinion shaper in a polarized context. And Mexico is a microcosm of what's happening in many countries in the world. Just today, we wake up to the news that Donald Trump is going to decide who goes into the morning press conferences held at the White House. And this has been my reality and that of my Mexican colleagues for many years. Mexico is one of the 5 countries in the world where it's most dangerous to be a journalist. And this is because as you move into a democratic backsliding, democratic erosion, journalists for the authoritarian governments that come into power are viewed as enemies of the people. They are viewed as someone that needs to be censored or repressed or the subject of character assassination. And for example, in my country, the past 2 presidents have a morning press conference where they signal out journalists and call them traitors. They call them agents of American, of the CIA, using USAID to run internal interference. I have been named 168 times in the morning press conference, framed in that view. And what happens to people like me is I walk down the street in Mexico City and people can come up and say, will come up and say, I want a selfie, I admire your work, thank you for being a check and balance, thank you for calling out the 118,000 disappearances that Mexico has, femicide, corruption, and applauding me. And then a block later, someone will yell at me, agent of imperialism, traitor to your country. And I was saying to them earlier, I sometimes have to suppress the need of answering back and running after these people and confronting them with the lie. And so how do you deal with this polarization and try to get your message across? First of all, it's very hard because in a context of polarization, the government and its trolls and its bots try to portray you as an enemy, and therefore what matters, what comes across is not what you say, but who you allegedly are. So it becomes an issue of how do you get the message across when the messenger has been discredited, ostracized, and this continues on a daily basis. I have 4.7 million X followers, which always surprises me because I'm not a rock star, I'm not a model. You know, I'm a 60-ish political analyst with strong views. But I think I have so many followers because for at least half of them, I am a teller of truth. And truth matters. Facts matter. Evidence matters. Countering official narratives that try to tell you that journalists are enemies or traitors, or that what they're saying is untrue, becomes your primordial mission. Because so many of these governments, and the US is sliding towards that, they are oligarchical, they are filled with cronies, they are filled with graft. They are shutting down mechanisms of accountability and of transparency. In Mexico, we had a commission to search for the disappeared. The government disappeared the commission to search for the disappeared as a way of trying to end the possibility of even providing the truth. So I feel that my mission is first not even look at what is said about me, try to counteract a lot of this with humor, try to maintain international connections. Think of the irony. I'm invited here by a Ukrainian organization that in a country at war, I go to Ukraine and I feel safer than I do in my own country. So maybe later we can talk about how what the role of journalism can be in a polarized society and how you can get the message across in a clear fashion and try and evade these distortions and this clamping down. But this is the reality for many of us, not only in Mexico, but in many other places in Latin America, which for you may seem distant, far removed, but it's a laboratory for democratic erosion that is spreading across the world and has already reached the shores of the United States.
Yeah, thank you, Denise. I think after the day you gain more followers on X.
Hopefully not haters.
Yeah. She's such a strong woman, and then later on we will talk about how to create or protect the space under this kind of polarized society. Now we're welcoming journalists from Ukraine, Nataliya. She will share lots of lessons on the conflict time.
Of course, Denise was speaking about the laboratory of these authoritarians, and we founded the organization which is called Public Interest Journalism Lab to counter that. And with two things, and we do have some lessons. I don't know whether it works for everybody, but at least that's how we are thinking every single day. So first, the story of the fake news kind of appeared in two earlier for us, because when the first Russian invasion started in 2014, we tried to explain that they were telling fakes and nobody believed that, the president of the country can just lie openly, or the let's say, Russian propagandistic media can lie. But very soon, there would be always people saying it's fake news when they are saying about something they don't like. And we as Ukrainians were always challenged about the idea, tell us about disinformation, tell us about propaganda. But, we were tied to speak about the fake news and debunking because our philosophy is different. Actually, it's not really working, debunking itself any longer. What the propagandists do, they polarize societies, they create feeling that people are fighting between each other, making this discussion even so horrible that you create artificial conflict. And Ukraine was for quite a long time, named to be a very divided country. We figured out that we are an extremely united country. And all social colleagues were saying the opposite thing, that people are united around a lot of values, and the society is way more united that Facebook shows us, and then also media, including the independent media, are saying. And we, with Angelina, were running the independent, TV station, an online media, very popular, created in 2014. But we started to understand that there is something happening. If you really go to the model, you are very popular if you mobilize people who agree with you, then you are a hero. And the more radical you are, the larger audience you have. But if you really want to do public interest journalism, you're losing your audience, and the people in your team also feel like, why we don't do this scandalous things? The people in our team would rebel. And that was the one thing, and we understand that even independent media can be polarizing and can create fractions where they are not there. And the second point, we were working, and I was covering conflict I was covering the annexation of Crimea, going to the occupied territories, and the war in the eastern Ukraine. And we did beautiful, incredible films, movies, everything. But we start to understand that people don't watch them. There are people, we will receive a lot of awards. There would be always people in our country say, you are the best, you are the only one. But the larger audience wouldn't care. That's why we founded this organization and started to understand a couple of things. So first, with research, because what we started to do, to show some of our clips and the video to the focus group and understand the reaction of the people, why the perfect content about human rights doesn't work. And skipping a lot of things, we would say that people who are totally on the other side, let's say like that, that's why I claim that modern advocacy journalism might not work with the people who disagree. They actually say that you manipulate our emotions. If you really show the photo of the poor Syrian boy on the beach, on the shore, why are you telling me? Do you want me to tell you I am a bad person? But yes, I don't care, because you manipulating me. And also, I should also say, now we, and my colleague will follow, but we're working on the war crimes documentation. But I feel so sad about Gaza, because it doesn't matter what is in the news. Either you have this opinion or not, you by default debunk. You're just saying just our cause matter, the others doesn't matter. So very fast, what were our findings? That disregarding everything, you can consciously find the way when people listen. People in Ukraine at least, but also we saw it in different countries, they don't like when they're told narratives. They won't like the film when you would say, Russia is horrible. They would won't trust you. But they would listen to the stories of the humans right away. They would tell the first-hand accounts, told in the most neutral way. Yes, it's maybe not that kind of advocacy thing, but it works. And I'll show you an example. I've been screening one of our documentaries about the war crimes, which made of the very, very, interviews of the people, very neutral, in Colombia. And there was an activist, let's say, he was very skeptical of the media, and he said, so great that I've seen these documentaries. I don't trust journalists. That they usually, so it's so great that I finally can see real Ukrainian people speaking without journalistic interference. And I thought should I tell him that an hour of films I showed to him were perfectly made by a lot of journalists in a very pure way, but let him believe he'd just seen Ukrainian people telling their story. So I'm kind of speaking along because it was our idea to bring this panel, and there is a couple of points to do. So I think we can consciously work on reaching out to the audiences which disagree. We can stay in our bubble to work with the people who agree with us. And it's very important because sometimes you need to tell the truth. Sometimes you need to be, surrounded by the people who support you in the climate where there is other people who hate you. But we still can fix, and I think we really need to retain this kind of advocacy approach in the societies where things don't travel well.
Yeah, I do see lots of neighbors. Angelina.
Yes, well, many things to add up to what Nataliya has said. Maybe I'll start with the fact, well, I've been running news at the public broadcaster, and I really like one thing that the first CEO of the Ukrainian public broadcaster said. He said, well, the public broadcaster is sort of an ambulance, which you normally don't call each day, but if something bad happens to you, you really need to have it in place. So this is something what happened to the public broadcasting, not a broadcaster, but public broadcasting during the full-scale invasion. Unlike many other countries across the world, with this tendency of decline towards trust in the news and news consumption, Ukrainians are just eating on news. Ukrainians are consuming news extensively because it's essential information for us to wake up with, to know, what's happening, how many missiles and where are attacking us, where are the evacuation corridors, when the blackouts will take place. So it's essential information. And what we've seen was an enormous raise of trust towards the public broadcaster, and the audience really appreciated the fact that Ukraine does have the public broadcaster. So it's kind of it's a service, kind of a public service that needs to be in place in times of crisis. Maybe I'll follow up on that later. I just wanted to really add up to several important things which Nataliya has raised, and it's about what we've learned in our. Yes. But add to what you've said about what we learned in our researches. So just several things. Essentially, probably, I will start with the fact that people really don't like to be alienated by the fact that they do not understand something and they need more information. We started with the COVID and vaccination research. We were trying to figure out why vaccination campaign doesn't work in Ukraine the way it should work, in times of a pandemic. And also we were trying to understand what is the way to tell about COVID and vaccination so that the people trust this information. And we could easily see that people really needed just factual information, like how vaccines work, like how do you use them, for people with specific diseases. And, the fact that there was a camp of those who were saying vaccines are essential and the others who do not, take vaccines are anti-vaxxers and believe in chips, and all the conspiracy theories, was really alienating people. This is why it was important for us to create pieces of content which really just go into facts, explaining things. Another research that was born out of the vaccination was a research on conspiratorial propaganda. We were trying to figure out, why propaganda narratives work within certain audiences, and we could see that very much it is about the sense of agency. So people need to feel that their thoughts and that their ideas matter, that what they think is really matter. It got us thinking about how you really make them feel that. How do you create, instruments of civic participation, things like that. And one of the recent researches that we did was on army service, military service in Ukraine and mobilization. We were trying to figure out what motivates people to go to the army and what demotivates. And one of the things that I really wanted to share, one of the findings, because we don't have so much time, was about sense of control. So in the circumstances of trauma, of huge challenge, which is, people face in the times of war, it is really essential for people to feel at least some sense of control in small things. For example, if we talk about mobilization, having an opportunity to choose a regiment, to know how long you will serve, where, with whom, things like that. But let me go to the project, which is
The call later, because it's 5-minute introduction. I think we're doing the second.
No, just a word about the Reckoning project.
I think it would be the second round of questions.
Which is documenting war crimes. Yes, we can talk about it later, because it's about justice journalism and documenting testimonies of people who have witnessed the war crimes.
Yeah. I am aware how challenging it is to moderate this panel. I can sit here and listen to all the interesting, exciting, and wonderful stories from this for us from women. And we do have lots of journalists down there. They will ask questions later. So I will try to make this work. So I will ask 2 questions for of us to discuss and share, and then I will open up to the floor. So we mentioned lots of challenges, your projects in the past. I think all of us are really eager to know, given how polarized this society is, are there any new opportunity emerge out of this? Because there might be needs or requests from the audience, not only at wartime, but as well as in just different society. I do think there's a young generation of audience who are looking for something different. What do you see in terms of opportunity, and what kind of new role we should be there as media organizations, and to fill that gap, and then we find maybe our new position in the ecosystem? Feel free to share if anyone has thoughts of this.
Should we just keep the order going? No fighting over the mic. So when we first started our work, we started documenting, preparing for a future free North Korea, future reunified Korea, working on transitional justice for the future. Yeah. I don't think we expected to be doing this for 20, 30 years. We thought the future would come a lot quicker. And so we have been doing a lot of re-strategizing of what does this documentation, what role can it play right now, and not just hoping that it can be opened when the North Korea that we want to be free will be free. And so one aspect of this is that we have been looking at how can we reach different audiences as well, to also reclaim the narrative that we had hoped, as a non-journalist, that we had hoped journalists would be able to pick up, but being understanding that maybe they're focused on certain issues, especially when it comes to North Korea. It's very focused on security, the politics, the government, the regime, and Kim Jong-un and his latest whatever he is doing. And so, how can we refocus the narrative on the people that have lived in North Korea? And one aspect of that is working with North Korean escapees themselves. Some people call them defectors, some people call them refugees. We call them escapees. And there are about 34,000 North Korean escapees who have resettled in South Korea. Over time, I think they had also been a bit disillusioned by the way that their stories had been portrayed by the mainstream media in South Korea, but also in Western media as well. And so what we've started to see is a lot of North Korean escapees, especially young North Korean escapees, reclaiming that narrative on YouTube. And it's really great where they come from a place where they had no internet, where they have only seen one single channel of media, where they have been able to freely express themselves, and working with that in that aspect. And also looking at ways in which they can also share stories about North Korea that's not always just fitting into that one framing of it's a place where it is a place where systematic human rights violations and crimes against humanity are occurring, but it's also a place where they called home. That's also where they have memories, and that's also where they, have this longing for as well. And so what we've been doing at NKDB is trying to create a museum on North Korean human rights of how can we share the stories of something that is ongoing? I think when we often think about museums and memorialization, it's often issues that have already happened. You'll go to like a Holocaust museum or, these great atrocity museums, and you're leaving like, that was terrible, what happened? It should never happen again. And you leave and you forget. But reminding people that things are happening right now. It's so easy to think about what happened in the past and blaming other generations for what had happened. But what is our responsibility right now? And how can we share the stories of people who actually experienced that and are experiencing that? I think that helps us work with not just North Korean escapees, but also younger South Koreans as well. As I mentioned, the North Korean human rights issue is often seen to be quite a conservative issue that is dealt with my parents' generation. But what we have found in a survey that we do annually is that while the Conservative Party in South Korea have dominated the North Korean human rights issues, when you actually ask the general South Korean public, their interest in North Korean human rights isn't connected with their political affiliation. But they just don't know where to get this information. They just don't know how to learn about North Korea that goes beyond the politics and security of it all. So we're trying to work with young South Koreans as well to humanize the issue.
Right. Wow. Cool. I do see when I was covering the warfare in Ukraine, I was visiting different museums in Ukraine. They were showing what's left from the Russian soldiers and telling war crime they've done. And we do have Chinese media outlets having online museum called June 4th or what happened in Hong Kong. I think different kind of exhibitions, online or offline, could be a really good format to tell the story and sympathize with their audience. Thanks. Good.
I have to believe, and I think that history shows that authoritarian regimes that polarize and try to divide countries may be long-lasting, but they're not there forever. And the role of journalists is to document the facts, the truth, the cost, the stories of the victims, which is what I am trying to do, and many others are trying to do. So the truth-telling is important, but the truth-telling in and of itself becomes an instrument of polarization in the hands of the government. So then you face the challenge of how do you bridge the divide? How do you speak to people beyond your constituency and break the silo of those who would just support you no matter what you said? And I think this is the real challenge of how we expand our role in a context of polarization, because the worst thing that can happen to a country, and Timothy Snyder has inspired my thinking on this, is when you're divided in us versus them. So every time the Mexican president attacked me and said, Denise Dresser is not a member of the people, I would come out and say, Mr. President, the last time I checked the Mexican Constitution, we were all members of the people. The people are not just the members of your party, of your position. So appealing to a series of common values that right now may not be the most popular values. I crisscrossed Mexico. I gave over 50 conferences in the defense of democracy. It was all futile because the ruling party won again. But I kept arguing that things like accountability, transparency, division of power, checks and balances, they're not the winning argument right now, but they will be. Because it's the history of human societies. When governments abuse their power, at some point people will rebel. And if you don't maintain those themes alive as a journalist, as an advocate, as a public speaker, the time in which those issues become important it will take longer to achieve that goal. So first, always reminding your listeners, your readers, that they are part of the people too, that they have rights under the Constitution, or universal rights under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Secondly, reminding people of the country that you want to be after this period of darkness, of authoritarianism, of polarization, the country that you aspire to be, the country that has accountability, transparency. Those themes are a recurrent part of my daily work. And also keeping the memory of what happened. I litigated against the past president of Mexico for 3 years in the courts. Not because I thought I could win, because it's very hard to litigate in courts dominated by the ruling party, but I was litigating against defamation, trying to create a protective umbrella for all others so that they could not be defamed by power. And the reason I did so with my two brilliant, by the way, women lawyers, is that we thought even if we lose, there's a footnote in history that someone fought back, that someone said, this is not right. This is not how governments should be treating journalists in a so-called democracy. And we ended up winning a little. And now the new president, who is a woman, and many people celebrate that, and I do want to remind people that women can be autocrats too. At least she has toned it down and doesn't refer to people specifically by name because of what we won. So even small things have a way of becoming incremental. And I think Bill Clinton said this once, you never know when things are going to change until they change. And you want to be part of what led to that change. It can take, as in the case of my country, 6 years, 12 years, 18 years to return to at least a minimal definition of electoral democracy. But if you don't start now, it's going to take longer.
Thank you. I think it's also a reminder for each of us, like what we can do, what we should stand on. Yeah. Nataliya.
So, if you, for instance, have the elections in Germany, and probably you think that the German media is a source to understand what's happening in Germany. If there is a 9/11 something, I probably would go to New York Times, but not a French publication. But for us Ukrainians, it was for quite some time the tragedy. If you're Ukrainian living in your country, so probably you bias by default, as if I'm not professional, as if I don't know that I have to do this, and that. And I'm writing now extensively to international media, but I don't do anything different than I used to do for Ukrainian media. It's all the same tool. Fact-checking, truth-seeking, and but when we started the project on documenting war crimes, we kind of understood by default that if we're Ukrainians, LD might be considered biased. But I think and that's what I want to share also a type of the way how we work, because I think everybody can use it in their own country, in their own place. It's not just about the war crimes. So what we do for the last 3 years within the Rethinking project is working on the documentation of the war crimes, where we speak to survivors of the war crimes and direct witnesses, not just the people who see something, but it's a lengthy interviews with a lot of details where they analyzed, translated, but later used for articles, documentaries, and probably for future memorials. But what is interesting that, the question is very different, because before we were asked so you work with lawyers? So maybe you kind of also, it's not really journalism, you're kind of doing something more, you're not doing so pure. But the questions which are asked in our case, we won't ask people, because we always think by asking the questions, how it would be seen in the court, because potentially every interview can be used in kind of litigation, or at least in some document. The question is not, what did Russians do to you? The question is what happened to you that day? Who were the people you've seen? how they were dressed, whether in civilian clothes, what language did they speak, did they have any accent? Because otherwise we know that legally it can be, debunked in the court because you cannot use leading questions. And this approach allowed us to collect like 500 testimonies, but in this regard, we showed our work internationally and globally, and that's why I'm saying about like the polarization and rethinking human rights. And we always say, it's not a tragedy. It's not like something bad happening in our country and we're unfortunate and, there are crimes. They can be legally proven as a crimes, and we live in the world where we should agree. Nobody can be tortured disregarding the views. Nobody can be, killed in that particular circumstances. And so our way to speak about the story, to totally move the narrative into the legal field from the position of journalist. So it's very hard. And I think like at the first year with international editors, because we wrote mainly for American media, I needed to really, like they were asking, like allege more crimes. But after they read the article, even like the most senior editor in the Western publication, just like, no, torturing is a war crime. In this article, there is clearly enough evidence to show that it was torture. We don't need to challenge that it didn't happen. So I think that's why I'm really saying that, like, if we maybe, it's just not an advice. It's up to everybody to decide, because there are brilliant advocacy organizations. But I do think that we need to prove some things to the people who disagree with us, or at least who are skeptical to us. And the usual way, the moral way, the work about the ethics, just like asking about the pity to the people whom they see on the screen, somehow doesn't work. That's why I'm returning. For me, this research about Italians speaking about that they don't have empathy to the migrants is still the major line for working like with our own war crimes, just knowing that I do understand people would think that we manipulate them if we just like show people crying without that particular, evidence and proof.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up. I think indeed when people in any part of the world are watching a short documentary about a village of Yahidne in Chernihiv Oblast, where more than 300 people, almost the whole village, were taken by the Russians into the basement and locked up there for a month, with 11 people dying in the basement, and people who were there were young children, infants, and elderly people. And when a foreign editor watches that, indeed, I mean, it doesn't matter why the Russians did it. It doesn't matter, what were the political views of the people who were taken there. It's just the story that is told by from a person who survived this is a powerful, absolutely powerful tool. But at the same time, on one hand, it doesn't matter, but it does matter why these people were taken into the basement, what they were told. Sorry, but what kind of torture was that? Of course, we are not lawyers, but the fact that we have gathered more than 500 testimonies and we've looked into them together with international lawyers gave us an opportunity to really understand what is happening with this war. Apart from the fact that it's just unspeakable violence, and violation of any laws and just human dignity. At the same time, there is system in these crimes, and there is a strategy in how an aggressor is operating in occupied territories and what is happening with occupation, and it really adds up to the discussion on how Ukraine should be, or whether Ukraine should be part of this peace deal, and what kind of a peace deal it should be. It does give us Ukrainian journalists, who might be regarded as partisan, but a total moral right to explain why you cannot let Russia stay in the occupied territories, because this is what we've witnessed, this is what we've documented. Hundreds of testimonies are saying that the Russians are not only prosecuting people, repressing people in occupied territories, deporting them from their homes, like torturing, raping, and things like that. This is what they will do further on, and this is why we cannot take this peace deal. So it's not only journalism that speaks about what we are witnessing directly. Here we are in Bucha, we see the bodies, we can say with our own eyes that these people were not didn't die from an accidental death. It's not collateral damage from the war, which many people think. Well, it's a war. It's a horrendous war, artillery war, aviation, and people get killed. No, thousands of people are getting killed specifically because they are shot dead or tortured or electrocuted and things like that. And this is why it gives us an opportunity with this methodology to be very strong and argumental in a discussion what should happen next, and what kind of peace this world needs, what kind of peace our country, our people need, and this region needs. I think we have all the strong arguments here.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for sharing. I think we've discussed how to retell the stories and raising up the awareness of human rights issues. We talk about how to approach your audience under this polarization of society. And we talk about the new role of media organization and how to add value to your work. I thought our session is ended in 11:15. Yeah, right.
2 minutes yet.
Great. I was so cool. So now we have 15 minutes for all the journalists in the room, for our concerned stakeholders and partners. It's your time. We have 1, 2, 3 questions for the first round. Can we have the mic to them? Thank you. Please be precise with your question, and maybe you want to introduce a bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Jules from Rapper in the Philippines. I just wanted to ask, there are people who don't care about human rights, and then there are people who care about human rights, but sometimes they get desensitized over telling the stories over and over again. So I would like to ask your thoughts about how do you manage this, considering that in the Philippines, I've covered the drug war, I tell stories of families over and over again. Sometimes there are people who say, we're tired, we don't want to work again or call out the government. So how do you deal with that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Should we wait or?
Yeah, I think we have the first round and then.
Okay. Hello, I'm Sherry Lee from The Reporter. I'm an investigative journalist. I have a follow-up question. And first, thank you for bringing such an inspiring panel. I think 4 of you present here are female. And we do think that female journalists or advocates encounter greater challenges in this polarized market of opinions. And as a woman, how do you face them? I think you have already mentioned a little about this. So in such a polarized world, how do you equip yourself spiritually, intellectually, and physically? Thank you.
Thank you. For those who don't know, the Reporter Foundation is an independent media in Taiwan. Okay.
I'm Leon from Singapore. Thank you for your remarks on fighting back on defamation. I'm the first person in the history of the world to be sued for defamation for sharing on Facebook a news report from a news website without any comment. But the people crowdfunded more than $700,000 to pay the Prime Minister's damages and costs. So I'm happy to tell you that the tide has turned. No politician will dare to sue a writer again for defamation in Southeast Asia. And now my question. We now have laws that enable governments to decide and pronounce that one is guilty of an offense without the normal appeal to the courts. How do you deal with this?
Okay, those are good questions, difficult ones.
Can I ask the first one, maybe shortly? Of course, people get used to, we're speaking about this situation that people are used to. Are not any longer able to see the news about human rights violation. So, first of all, we had also a different kind of project with which actually we met Denise, and also I met Hanna. We call it Connecting Continent, bringing to Ukraine editors, pundits, people like that from Asia, Latin America, and South and Africa. And in a lot of countries, they have a lot of troubles, they have a lot of issues, but I've never seen anybody who didn't was not really able not to relate to the personal story, a very simple personal story of Ukrainian men or women who told about their sufferings. I still really believe that there is something in our human nature, and we also were thinking, because the issue might be polarized, we really didn't want Ukraine to be kind of polarizing things, and screening our films globally, I understood that it actually works, like this kind of neutrality. But the other thing, what I believe we suffers a lot, it's the fatigue, compassion fatigue, and our answer is the only one. Of course, if you always say that if you just look at the survivors as victims, you just evoke the feeling of pity, and you just feel that you can do nothing like that. I the most paralyzed when I used to watch the news about Gaza, because I felt like I can do nothing about that. But about Ukraine, I feel okay reporting our tragedies because I think I can do something. And our way to make our stories travel well, let's say, or be seen, is to treat these people as survivors who inspire. Because I always say, you cannot be tired of being inspired. And there is nothing more inspiring than incredible people who live through the hardship, something you couldn't even imagine, but they go on. But as journalists, you ask this question. It's really, you can edit it as a very sad story, as like a very one, like, what a horrible world we live, what a horrible people did that to them. But you can do the story. But these are these amazing people who overcome, and this is the answer. And I really shortly want to answer defamation, not something I work. I talked to Gustavo Goretti, an incredible Peruvian journalist who was sued by his government for many, many years, and they invented something incredible today. It's an investigative journalist. And because they have laws on defamation, similar to Singapore, when they prepare investigation, by default, they prepare the team of lawyers to sue anybody who challenges their investigation. So if a politician will start to speak that their investigation is fake, they charge that politician for investigation. That's how they fight the bots or anybody who wants to say that the investigation is fake. It's kind of preemptive litigation. I've never heard about that. It's their new know-how, but I think it should be used globally.
Of how you live through this, and I hope this resonates with other journalists here. First, I have a very personal strategy. It's called the 3 A's, like Alcoholics Anonymous, but amor y amistad, armadura y alcohol, and this translates as love, friendship, armor, and alcohol. A glass of wine at night helps take the edge off the hate. Secondly, humor is a great tool. Having the capacity to laugh about yourself, because I've made a collection. There are hundreds of memes, cartoons about me. Recently, with the closure of USAID, I've never personally received funding from USAID, but there are cartoons of me with a USAID T-shirt, cartoons of me on the body of an animal, photoshopping as if I'm in a straitjacket, hundreds of them. I'm going to eventually publish a book, and I do these collages on X where I challenge people to make something even better than what they've been doing. Then the third strategy is confrontation, because people often hide in anonymity. And I was telling them an anecdote, which I think is very revelatory. On the street, someone yelled at me, you agent of imperialism, you traitor, you everything. Lesbian, that's frequently used as if it were an insult. And so he's walking away, and I pop into a little shop. This is a block away from my apartment. And I buy a little pot of honey. And I chase after him saying, here, take this pot of honey. You really need some sweetness in your life. You need to chill, man. I'm not responsible for the end of democracy in this country. And then the third...
you need to say that the man is running away from you.
And the man is running away from me, because when you confront people with their own lack of humanity and with the implications of what they're doing, and you present yourself as a human being, and you step away from the language of polarization, because that there's also a language of how you refer to the other, and in Mexico it's very common. Fifi, chairo. I mean, the polarization has created a whole new language. I never use that language. I use the language of our common humanity, of decency, of would you like a pot of jam? And the fourth, and this is serious, is creating networks of support that are international. So right now I'm teaching a course at Johns Hopkins so that I can be away from Mexico for a while and strengthen those ties. I've been defended oftentimes by Article 19. I do this preemptive litigation, as in I'm always surrounded by lawyers who I'm still litigating cases. Because in authoritarian context, journalists can be charged with anything. And I'm now being charged with, it's called sexual violence against women in the political context, because I criticized a woman politician. So I'm now preparing for that next round of litigation, but with lawyers who already know how to do this, because we've been down this track before. And finally, just appealing to the Committee to Protect Journalists, to others around the world. I know that for many of you, Mexico is not on your radar. Nicaragua is not on your radar. El Salvador is not on your radar. The U.S. now is going to be on your radar, because the things that journalists are starting to live now, it's like I tell my colleagues in the U.S., welcome to my world. We are a preview of coming attractions, and you're going to have to brace yourselves and be part of this international network, because you're going to need protection.
Yes.
I would quickly answer the first question. We've been through an experience of covering different human rights stories, but one of them I really wanted to share with you. I don't know how many of you have heard of the Maidan killings during the Revolution of Dignity. 48 people were killed on the 20th February 2014 in the center of Kiev by the police officers. And it was a total shock to the nation. First time anything like that happened. The whole country went into mourning, and essentially this tragedy changed so much in our country. But it seemed that the trial against these police officers and the trial of the Maidan killings will forever have the attention of the nation, but it didn't. The trial took almost 10 years. And during the war, full-scale invasion, the trial never stopped. Like a crazy dedicated judge had this trial, and we were following this trial, and nobody actually cared about this trial anymore. Nobody was attending this court. Nobody was not too many journalists were covering it. But when the verdict arrived with the names, specific names, who were responsible for the killings in Maidan, because there was so much Russian propaganda saying that who was responsible for that. There were so many conspiracy theories, like who could have killed 48 people in the central square. Nobody actually cared, but we never stopped covering it. And when the verdict arrived, we were capable of saying to the country, to the nation, that justice works, even during a full-scale invasion, even in times when the country believes that the judicial system is still very much corrupt, that it doesn't work. No, you have a really strong argument, not only for the history, but also for the sense of what is really working in this country. In these Facebook talks or talks with people who are saying, nothing works in this country, we have corrupt judges and this doesn't work, you say, listen, stop. I've been doing a very unpopular job of covering this trial, which took 10 years, and a super dedicated team of judges who never stopped. By the way, the head judge was attacked and almost got killed. Just a stupid incident on the street. He was suggested a job in a court like higher of his position, but he dropped that proposition. He really wanted to finish this trial, and it's a reason for people to be proud of something. And even though it's not popular, you still keep on covering, and there is not too many people, but part of people who know the story and they care about the story. And there will come a moment when people will appreciate that you have covered the story.
Thank you so much. Do we have time for one or two questions? We are running out of time. One question. Please. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Nataliya, Editor-in-Chief of Global News Service. I used to supervise Korean service at Radio Free Asia. We have encountered the same problem, like people are fatigued with the human rights abuse cases. So we're also exploring, how can the story be interesting and inspiring. So one of our team went to Britain. We found that there's a North Korean community. So you tell the story of resilience, triumph, and the rebirth in a foreign land. They also did a story about K-pop in Cuba. Why K-pop became popular in the Communist Party? A lot of people don't believe they have the internet, but they saw all the K-pop music. So I think there is just a many way to tell the story. I agree, it's very easy to get fatigued with abuses, which, Radio Free Asia did a lot of human rights stories. So we always want to connect with our audience, but try to be creative.
Yeah.
And I have another question, since Dennis mentioned U.S. is actually follow the footsteps of Latin Americans. So how do you deal with the really, physical threats, physical risk as a demon or reporter?
Thank you so much. On this, maybe you can share 30 seconds from each, how to protect yourself, and then your experience with non-colleagues.
Yeah, I think it's been mentioned before about the importance of telling resilient stories, human stories, but also understanding what the stories of the people that you're reporting on want to tell as well. I think so often we think that this is a narrative that needs to be taken, but I think stories are so much stronger when it comes from the affected communities themselves, and rather than us thinking that this is what the world wants to hear, what are the stories that they want to share? And also it's so easy to think, I think for the audiences to remind them that what is going on in North Korea, in Ukraine, in Mexico, in Cuba will never affect them. And it just doesn't happen overnight. When we created the exhibition, we did a focus group and lots of surveys of what do people think about when they think about North Korea, and most people said political prison camps, public executions. When we spoke to North Korean escapees, what stories do you want to share? And nobody mentioned political prison camps, public executions. So the theme that we chose was freedom of expression. And so, combining that narrative of what do people want to hear and what are the stories that the affected communities want to share as well.
Thank you. That's crucial. And
I want to finalize with that, we human rights work, even inside one country, but between, it's as if we are pushed against each other in the competition who cause these wars. North Korean or Ukrainian, maybe Mexican, maybe Myanmar, maybe something else, maybe Singapore. And it's very hard. We were pushed artificially, against Palestinians, against Syrians, with whom we work, whom we like, whom we work together. Therefore, I think it's our finding. Let's work together. I was very creative on the people in this morning. We are organizing this panel, and I really thought if there would be Ukrainians, if we would make a Ukrainian panel, that would be the Ukrainians. If there would be Mexican journalists, they would be just them. Or North Koreans would do their own panel, and would be people interested in North Korea. That's why I want to have a Taiwanese moderator. Thank you so much for Jason for agreeing despite the schedule. And having the people. So we have people all across the world listening. So we need to share the stage with the others And not to tell that, oh, you get this, we don't get that. Let everybody get something. If justice is served in Ukraine, let it be served in case of Gaza. Let it be served in case of North Korea. Instead of saying, there is a hypocrisy. You are help, they are not. We are not. And I think that's really, let's just cooperate and again, share the stage with each other. It makes it quite interesting.
Yeah, final remarks.
I want to answer your question. How do women in contexts of danger or harassment operate? In my case, I started wearing a hat because I have very iconic hair, puffy. People recognize me on the street because of it. So I wear a hat. It may seem ridiculous, but it makes me feel safer. I never go to marches alone. I used to go to all marches by myself. Now I go with the team. Third, my children do not live in Mexico, and this is a huge source of relief for me. They are now insisting that I put, bulletproof windows on my car, which I will never do, because there are many more people who are in more danger than I am, especially in the provinces, who are confronting drug traffickers and people who disappear women, etc. But my point here, I think that bravery, not that I feel particularly brave, but doing the right thing, it's contagious.
Thank you so much for all the sharings. I think we all took lots of notes today, so make sure you have love, friendship, alcohol, and honey with you. Maybe that's useful. And also mention the international network to protect yourself, creating a space together. That's why we are hosting RightsCon here. Thank you so much to be here in the room with us till the end. I think we all agree you can be tired of being inspired. So thank you so much for all the stories.